Harvard law professor Larry Lessig and possible presidential candidate. Now, he has an incredibly unique candidacy, which he'll tell us about, and I'll ask him about. Are you running for president or are you not?
If we hit the funding target that we've set by Labor Day, $1 million by Labor Day, raised in this crowd-funded, Kickstarter-like way, then I'm going to be a candidate for president.
Is there another condition involved here, like for you to not run?
Right. Well, if all of a sudden the leading Democratic candidates, Hillary and Bernie, say, yeah, Lessig's right, this issue of corrupting influence, of the inequality of the system is going to be the central issue we push, the first issue we tackle in our administration, then my work's done. But if they don't, then I'm going to be in this race and I'm going to make a run for the nomination.
So campaign finance reform is how they would describe it in Washington. That's what you're running on. And it's unique because you're saying this would basically be a referendum president. But what does that mean? You know, what does this one issue presidency indicate? What does it mean? Because I think nobody's ever seen this before, so they've got to have a lot of questions around it.
Yeah, that's right. So let's step back a little bit and understand what it's really about. People like to call this campaign finance reform. Those aren't words I like to use because I think that's like talking about an alcoholic as somebody with a liquid intake problem. That's a very, very sterile way to talk about a fundamental problem in our democracy. And that problem you can really understand as a problem of equality. I'm not talking about wealth equality. I'm not talking about speech equality. What I mean by that is the equality we're all supposed to have in a representative system. In a representative system, your vote, your voice, your power in that system is supposed to be the equivalent of mine. But right now we have a system where 130 families have given half the amount of money that's been raised in the Republican primary so far. 400 people, 400 families have given half that have been raised in all the primaries so far, which means they have extraordinary power in our political system. And what that power translates into is the ability basically to block any kind of reform. So when people like Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton talk about the amazing things they're going to do when they're elected president, I want to be the guy who says, look, the emperor's wearing no clothes. The emperor is wearing no clothes because they can't achieve any of the things they're talking about until they address this corrupting inequality first.
I think a lot of progressives are asking, why don't you believe Bernie? Like, they understand why you don't believe Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's hard to argue she's for change, given that the Clintons are an enormous part of the establishment. But Bernie Sanders says he'd do it. Why don't you believe him?
Oh, I believe he wants to do it. I believe Bernie because I've known Bernie, I've seen Bernie. I think Bernie has been an incredible leader for progressive ideas throughout his time in the United States Senate. He has been consistently pushing for ideas that he's now talking about. He is no triangulator. He is the real deal. The question isn't what he believes, though. The question is what he can do. And so when he runs for president, and if he's elected, and I'm not somebody who believes he can't be elected, I believe he could be elected. If he were elected, he would be elected with a mandate that's divided among 5 or 6 different issues. And when you have a divided mandate, and you stand up to Congress and you take on the most powerful forces in our democracy, what that divided mandate is worth is nothing. It can't take on those forces and win, because they'll always have an excuse, because the system depends on them keeping their power, because as Elizabeth Warren puts it, the system is rigged. And that power even of somebody as committed and strong as Bernie, is not going to be enough to overcome that rigged system. So what I've said is we need to have a single mandate. We need a candidate with an overwhelming mandate for one idea, for the idea of taking on that power and winning. And if we had that mandate, then maybe we could win. I don't even know if it's certain we could win. This is not an easy thing to imagine winning, but it is the best shot we've got, and it's 1,000 times more likely than anything that either Bernie or Hillary could do if they won, even if they won with a landslide.
The Republicans are not known for being conciliatory. So yes, the mandate would be clear, but it's not like they haven't ignored clear mandates before. So isn't it unrealistic to expect that the Republicans would then say, oh, a Democrat has won and this is his most important issue. By all means, of course, let's pass the bill you'd like.
Yeah. If it were a regular Democrat running as a regular politician, getting elected as a regular president, then all those moves would be possible. Republicans could stalemate and stall just as they have in this last president's administration. But look, it's not a regular Democrat running as a regular president. And it's not running on a regular sort of geeky-like issue called campaign finance. What this issue would be is the fundamental commitment of a representative democracy, equal citizens. And while Bernie Sanders, when he talks about equality in the context of wealth, is, in my view, talking about something very important, that big idea of equality is actually not believed in by most Americans. That's a pretty divided America when you talk about that sense of equality. But the equality I'm talking about, the equality of citizens, is something that I don't think anybody can argue against on the other side. So if the Republican Party wants to take on the mission of arguing against the idea of equal citizens, then make my day, because I would be more than happy to wage a fight, whether it took a day or a week or however long it took, to get them to finally come to the place that I think most Americans believe they should be, believing in equal citizens, and especially after we've had a campaign where this has been the central issue in the campaign. We would go to every member of Congress as they were running up to the November election. We'd be asking them, are you going to stand with the people, with the people's referendum? Or are you going to vote against the people when the people's referendum is passed? And if they are going to vote against the referendum, let their constituents know about that. We would create every political pressure we could to change this from a partisan fight between Republicans and Democrats to the kind of fight it is, a fight between the insiders in Washington and people outside. Now, the way I do that is the way you've done it, Cenk. It's not to bow down to the Democratic Party at every turn. It's not to believe that the only value in America are the values the Democratic Party talks about. It's not to say that everything Democrats say is true. It's to say that I am a Democrat because I believe in the core values of the Democratic Party, but I don't think the party has lived up to those values either. I think the Democratic Party has been as much responsible for allowing the system of corruption to grow as the Republican Party. Look, the 1990s gave us Bill Clinton pushing the Democratic Party into this massive fundraising game as they bent over backwards to make Wall Street happy with what the Democratic Party wanted. I think the Democrats are as much responsible for this as the Republicans. And this campaign, my campaign, would be a campaign that tried to say to Americans, look, we're not Democrats and Republicans first, we're citizens first. And as citizens, what we're entitled to is equal power in this democracy. And so use this election to demand at least that.
Is there anything that Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or anyone else in the race can do to knock you out of the race? For you to say, okay, well, look, it turns out you guys are going to do the same thing I'm doing, or is there nothing they can do?
Well, I'm not sure there's anything they can do, but here's what I think would be necessary for it to be a hard question. They would need to say, this issue that many people have been talking about, the issue you've been talking about, the issue I've been talking about, this issue is going to be the first issue that they, as president, are going to address. They're going to run a campaign that focuses the nation's attention on this as the fundamental issue. And if they win, they will make passing legislation to deal with this corruption the first thing they do. If they say that, we could then have an argument about whether their mandate would be powerful enough. But that would be a harder argument for me to make. And again, my objective is simply to get this issue decided in a way that makes democracy possible. So if they did that, I would be willing to say, if both of them did that, I'd be willing to say, look, the fight here is now to win on this issue and to make it possible for them to win the election and to win in passing that statute.
But even if Bernie Sanders, even if you were to believe that he's a progressive, perfect or ideal, perfect's too harsh a standard, but an ideal progressive candidate, and he says, okay, Larry, you win. I had it at issue number 8. I moved it to 2, but okay, no mas. I move it to number 1. It's going to be my top issue. he wouldn't have the built-in advantage that you're talking about where he would be a referendum president. The Republicans would then say, no, we think he won because of income inequality or climate change, so we'll never work with him on anything. He'll never get it done. Wouldn't that still be a problem?
No, that's right. If all he did was say it's his first issue, there'd be no difference from where he is right now. There's no difference between it being number 8 or number 2 or number 1. But what I'm saying is he could do more than that. What he could do is say, this is not just my first issue. This is the focus of what I'm talking about as the thing we've got to do if we're going to make government possible again. And let me tell you, when we make government possible, then there are a lot of other things I want to do too, things that are important to my base, things like dealing with income inequality, dealing with climate change, taking on the banks. Those things are critical too, and know that I will do that after I've dealt with this issue. But I've got to deal with this issue if you're even going to have a reason to believe me on those other issues. That's different from just saying this is my top issue. That's saying the focus of my campaign, my administration will be this. Now, you're right. I think that's still a weaker mandate than the mandate I would have. I think the mandate I would have would still be much, much stronger to demand this kind of reform. And frankly, the potential to demand this reform in a cross-partisan way, I think, would be greater with what I'm talking about. So I'm not committing, a formula. I'm saying that if the judgment is proper, that's just as likely, what that strategy would be, just as likely to win, I'm willing to concede that and step aside and let that happen. But what I'm trying to do is to engineer the highest probability that we can get a democracy back. And I think the mandate that I've described in the referendum president is the way to do that.
As much as, I deeply respect Bernie Sanders, I think the Republicans will tackle him. And I can't see how he solves this problem without committing all of his energy and resources to it. And if you don't solve this problem, then you're not going to solve the other problems. You're just not going to solve them, right? You could have the best intentions in the world and you're not going to do it. So as much as I love and respect him, I can't see a way on how he gets this done or how anybody gets it done unless they say it's pretty much the only thing I'm going to do. What would you want people to do in terms of the sacrifice they're willing to make? If you're right, I'm right, and our democracy's on the line here, and if you want to regain democracy by getting money out of politics, what would you want the average person that's watching this video that actually cares about America, believes in our democracy, to do?
Yeah, they've got to join this campaign. And what that means is not to join the campaign for me, necessarily. They've got to join the campaign in first explaining why this referendum is absolutely necessary, and to help people to understand what this referendum would do. The biggest thing that we saw when you first started talking about this, when I wrote about it, is people had this understanding that to be for Lessig was to be against Bernie Sanders. To be for Lessig would be against having a woman president like Hillary Clinton. Well, that's just not the truth. What we can see is that this is both and. We can have a referendum and then have the next great president. And this understanding is going to take people explaining it. And it's not going to be explained in 30-second ads on television. It's going to be explained person to person on Facebook posts or by clever ways of putting videos up that people watch and go viral, or tweets, or other ways in which we now have the ability to convince and educate ourselves about what we need to do. And as this percolates and more people support the campaign, and they signal their support by giving $10 a month to our Kickstarter, then it gets the attention of the media. And the media begins to say that, they were wrong about this too. Because they've been wrong about a lot of things in the last couple of years. Of course, Bernie Sanders was never going to happen until he did. The Donald Trump was, of course, going to blow up his whole campaign 7 or 8 times until he didn't. The conventional wisdom in politics today is pretty bad about these citizen-driven movements. So what we need to do is to get people to participate in that movement by either giving us money, spreading the word, or making it clear to everybody this is the change that's got to happen.
So finally, Professor Lessig, is your dream scenario, your home run, you get elected as the referendum president, and then you have a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren type of person as your VP in the wings. You solve the money in politics issue, and then you say to Bernie or Elizabeth, whoever it might be, have at it, Hoss. Now go fix everything.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's to make it possible for the next president, the next great president, to be a truly great president by having a government that can actually respond to them and the people as opposed to responding to the funders. It's to make it possible for them to govern, to give them a democracy again, and to do it as quickly as possible and to let the referendum just be a point where we all affirm what I think we already believe, that a democracy, a representative democracy, is supposed to be a system that represents us, not the tiny fraction of the 1% who fund the campaigns these politicians depend on.